Welcome to the 400th episode of the Libertarian Christian Podcast. I am joined by the well-dappered, dressed up Cody Cook, who is my co-host, and our guest, Jim Babka, because he is larger than life. He is in the larger square on our video if you're watching on YouTube. He is former press secretary for 2000 Libertarian Party presidential candidate Harry Browne, president of Downsize DC for over 2 decades, and is currently the executive producer of Respect America and the host of the podcast Gracearchy with Jim Babka. Hey, Jim, thanks for joining us again for Libertarian Christian Podcast. This is a special episode for us.
It is a special episode. I in fact, when I started to tell a couple of my friends I was going to be here, they're like, wow, it's a big honor. And I do feel honored. So thank you.
Oh, well, that's great. Well, I think like milestones like this really, give us time to reflect and about like the state of things. How are we doing? How is the state of what we're trying to accomplish doing, And I feel like there was one person in my mind, and it was you, that I was like, you know what? He's a good person to have a conversation with about the state of the libertarian movement, the state of the Libertarian Party, the state of what does communicating the message of liberty look like? How, what kind of new audiences do we face? So there's just a lot to discuss there, and I just felt like it was a good time to have you on. So let's you're laughing at me. And we're both looking at Cody,
I'm enjoying Cody.
Yes,
I'm enjoying Cody experimenting here.
Yeah, no, if you're only listening, you are very much missing out. Go to our YouTube channel and watch this episode, or at least a few minutes of it. It's going to be very distracting. Maybe we'll see. Jim, you've been on my show before, and you've introduced yourself, and people have gotten to know you. But let's just say this is their first episode that they haven't met you. Give us a little bit of your background beyond what I just read out loud.
I became a libertarian all the way back in 1996. I had been raised in a Christian home, my Christian school, Sunday morning church, the whole 9 yards. Like the doors were open, we were there. And then Christian school on top of that, and had come out as a kind of Goldwater Reagan Republican in my dad's image. But in 1996, I couldn't vote for Bob Dole. I just couldn't do it. And
I couldn't either. It wasn't because...
I had the option to vote for Bob Dole and could not do it. So I found the Libertarian Party. I saw Harry Browne. Harry Browne changed my life. 4 years later, I ended up being his press secretary, which was an amazing run or journey. After the campaign was over, I continued to stay involved in various projects. Went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court on a case. We took a case there and then started Downsize DC, home of the Read the Bills Act, One Subject at a Time Act, and the Write the Laws Act, and the Free Competition and Currency Act for a time. And we did that, still do that. It's still open today. It's called Agenda Setters by Downsize DC right now. But in 2019, my professional work shifted pretty tremendously. And I'm doing stuff with a variety of different groups. The one I would feature right now would be Respect America, where we're telling stories of real humans who went through coercion, particularly at the hands of the state. To demonstrate that it violates the principle of human respect, which says that every time you use coercion, theft, and violence to achieve a social goal, you diminish, always, that's why it's a principle, you diminish the happiness, harmony, and prosperity of another person.
Yeah. I'm going to turn the tables on you for a second and ask you a question that you asked me in an episode that I don't know if will have aired by this time or not. Do you see this as a ministry for yourself?
I see my whole life as being a ministry. I don't believe in the idea of full-time Christian ministry. What has been going on for me over the last, let's say, 13, 15 years has been kind of discovering kind of the warp and woof of my faith. So I'm not a hyphenated Christian. I don't mean this like I am a libertarian Christian, but to me, it's like saying Christian or libertarian. To me, they don't. I can't tell where one starts or the other stops now, because I've spent a lot of time working all of that out for myself and understanding
and being both.
Yes, how being a libertarian was a social way to express my faith. I don't know everyone I meet. I am not going to be in permanent contact with everyone I meet. It's one thing to say that I love my neighbor and I get along with the people that are in my life on a day-to-day basis. But I basically have a duty as well to leave strangers alone. And that includes people who live on the other side of town. Like the idea that I can somehow or other set policy for people in California or Washington or Florida or Maine, regardless of where it is I live. I happen to be in Ohio at the moment. Regardless of that, is wrong. But I don't even have the ability. I live in Akron, Ohio, to set the policy in the next ward. It's completely outside my domain to even attempt to do that. And I believe it's anti-Christian to impose my social and political views on other people.
You mentioned working for Harry Browne, and he seems to be one of those figures that's a little bit like Ron Paul, and that everybody sort of seems to like him. You know, people sort of speak very positively about Harry Browne's campaign. And it seems that maybe the Libertarian movement today maybe is more divided than it was then. That the fact that we could sort of all kind of like and agree that certain people were basically good, even though we might disagree on certain points. I mean, do you feel like that's a difference in the messaging, that Harry Browne had a better message that we could kind of return to? Or is it just kind of an artifact of the way that the culture shaped, the way that sort of being online sort of is, and that kind of tribalism that's sort of emerged?
So Harry was not without his detractors back then. I mean, he did join the Libertarian Party. So previous to joining the Libertarian Party, everybody wanted him to come. Then there was a period of 6 years where there were a group of people who called themselves libertarians who hated him. And then after he left, people missed him, especially after he passed away in March of 2006. And so, but the division was not what it is now. Both times, Harry won on the first ballot. He ran in 96 and 2000. And in 96, he had over 60% of the vote. And the second time around, he still won on the very first ballot. So the level of rancor and division was definitely far less than it is now. And it should have been. It deservedly should have been. He believed that the message and the philosophy that he was attempting to promote needed to be extremely radical. But he believed how he needed to say it, how he presented himself, needed to be extremely normal. And so he looked like he walked out of central casting for the part, and he came prepared. I love to tell people that when I first joined the campaign in 1999, I was given a notebook, and it had at that point in time 700 or 800 different sound bites. And what he would do is he would be out, doing something. He'd be interviewed. He would take notes. He would put them inside his pocket, inside his suit coat, which he was always wearing a blue suit, white shirt, red tie. He would put it in there. And then at night, because he was a professional writer, he would sit down and he would look at what he had noted for the day. And then he would write it out so that he could improve it. He could polish it, make it perfect. And then he would rehearse it. And then it went into into this book, which grew to almost 1,100 quotes by the end of the campaign. They were sound bites, and they were categorized by topic, from abortion to, vaccine. Like it was, just arranged in order. And if you knew what he was doing well enough, you could almost see the numbers of the quotes as he was using them in the course of an interview on Fox News with Sean Hannity or something. Like you could see it, you could see him executing. So in other words, he didn't take these short 3 and 5 and 7 minute interviews he had to do. He didn't just wing it. He didn't just go, I can just wing it. I'm so brilliant. He came in and he hit his marks just like that. And that ended up being his last campaign book. Sharon Harris, who was then president of the Advocates for Self-Government, full disclosure, I'm also associated with them right now. She became aware of this book through me and said, we need to get our hands on it. And Liberty A to Z was actually Harry's last book, published, I think, in 2003. And it was just a collection of his sound bites from his campaigns. So he did, Cody, the right things to make himself so well remembered. And the quote that is remembered the most, the one that is the hallmark or the great grand slam of all time, is that government is only good at one thing. It breaks your legs, hands you a pair of crutches, and says, see, without us, you wouldn't be able to walk.
That's good. Well, so I mean, do you feel like the message has changed over the years, or do you feel like there's been a consistent kind of core to libertarianism? Because it seems like there's so many these little infights and debates. Like what's libertarianism been to you? I mean, do you feel like it's the same thing it was then?
Well, it shouldn't have changed. It should have been the same all along. And yes, it has. If you were to pull out a copy of Liberty A to Z right now and start thumbing through it, and this basically, the world changed after 9/11 pretty significantly. And in the late 1990s, we were very, very hopeful. There was a peace dividend. The Cold War was over. There was a lot of opportunity to expand our liberty, and people were feeling a sense of confidence. And there's a belief that the people need to be under great duress, and that's when they will then express or push for their liberty. I think most people in that situation reach for tyrants. And there is some evidence that some segment will definitely push for liberty. And maybe we're seeing a tiny bit of that right now. Maybe. But back then, the idea that you would say drugs should be legalized, even marijuana, was completely anathema. There were a whole host of things that you couldn't talk about that we have basically won in the culture in the ensuing quarter century since. And we were able to express those things, and people were beginning to open up their eyes and their minds to the possibilities back then. Has it evolved for me? Yes, definitely. Because when I first joined Harry Brown's campaign, I still had a lot of conservative Republican in me to work out. And I've grown and learned more about what I believe. And in 2012, really 2014, we launched something called the Zero Aggression Project. And the Zero Aggression Project was about the Zero Aggression Principle, which says that it's wrong to use force to achieve your social and political goals. And we were looking to try to demonstrate how that was a tool that you could use to analyze a variety of issues. And we were trying to teach people at zeroaggressionproject.org how to think like libertarians. Now, as I just said a few moments ago, it really comes down to coercion or force being used as opposed to persuasion. That really should be the standard. When I first joined the party, it was possible for the pastor and the pornographer to sit in the same pew at the Libertarian event and have a amicable, interesting conversation. They could find each other interesting and even entertaining. They might leave these two individuals to go do something very radically different. Their lifestyles and their choices and their values personally might differ, but they recognized that it was wrong to coerce each other, and they were able to get along. And what I fear has happened now is that the culture war has seeped in, and people have begun to pick a side in the culture war. And what they're doing is they're adopting other people's messaging as opposed to delivering a consistent libertarian message, which is that coercion, force, is always less moral and less practical than voluntary persuasive types of acts. That's the through line to me of libertarianism.
Yeah. So I have a follow-up to that, because I think there is this, I would say, this like blend of what do we talk about when we try to promote liberty. And if the culture is shifting toward, for example, right after 9/11 in the run up to the Iraq War, libertarians would be very anti-war, right? And that would be kind of like what you would talk about. You'd be about being anti-war. You would pick a different decade. We're against the Fed. Pick a different decade, and now we're against whatever the latest thing is. And so sometimes the culture it actually shifts in what it's talking about. How much does the changing of the libertarian message actually can be sort of attributed to the fact that the culture is talking about different things? It was one thing to say that, like, I remember when Trump got elected in 2016, I remember one of my leftist friends saying, well, we can get back to protesting against war again. And I was just like, wait, you mean you weren't doing that during Obama? Because she loved Obama. And so libertarians have like that through line where basically, we're going to always be against war. We're going to always be in favor of legalizing certain things. Does the messaging shift in your mind at all to what the culture is actually talking about? Because the culture war kind of influences what people are talking about.
So traditionally, what it has meant to be a libertarian in terms of engaging with the culture is that we are the critics on the outside. We are going to demonstrate regardless of whether or not the president is Republican or Democrat, and I've been through several of these now, these changes, we're going to demonstrate a consistent theme throughout there, and that's usually going to run us headlong against whoever the established or winning side at the moment is. So this situation we're in now is different to me than any administration that we've dealt with, including the first Trump administration, in that I believe there are some things that we can presently point to, and I think this is exceptionally rare, that are good news. There has been very, very limited good news that has come out of previous administrations. We've already had basically a 4-year term's worth in the short amount of time that Trump's been in. I am overall critical, and I think there's some things that the administration is doing that are heinously bad, destructive to the nth degree. But there are at least some things we can look at right now and speak about. So the core should always be the principle. And if the principles are at odds with what is happening right now, what the dominant party is doing, that's where you're going to end up having this cultural interaction.
Yeah, I mean, so there's kind of a tension there because, like, on the one hand, like, I think we want to be sort of evangelizing and reaching people and finding common ground, right? And so if there's some good news or there's some, seeming common ground that's there, we want to kind of use that, whether they're on the left, the right. But like sometimes drawing those lines is really tricky because, like, you see this among like sort of ecumenists, like they want so badly for there to be common ground that sometimes real significant differences, they sort of don't treat them as significant differences, And so, like, one thing that's, I think, bothered me a little bit is seeing, like, there'll be like this kind of, sort of wacko paleo con type person or whatever who says, like, I hate the government because there's too many Jews in it. And then we go, hey, we hate the government too. We have common ground. And it's like, well, no, we don't. Like, so, I don't know. So I think that's been a struggle for me a little bit, is finding that tension, because you don't want to be saying like, well, I don't want a coalition with anybody. I don't want to work with anybody. I'd rather just be right. And like, that's a danger. But there's like another danger, because like obviously then nothing's going to get done. But the other danger is that we actually sort of set our principles aside to build something that's kind of libertarian-ish, but it's also very statist, right? And so, I mean, do you have a certain kind of philosophy that kind of helps you navigate that? Or
so on a day-to-day basis, during the heyday of Downsize DC, which would have been from 2005 until 2013 or 14, because we grew and got decently large during that period of time. We were on our way. We did what was called transpartisan activism. And what that meant was we were willing to work with somebody right or left, and we didn't have to agree on what our motive was. We were there because we agreed that we wanted a similar or identical endpoint. So the policy result that we were looking to achieve, it was the goal there. And we agreed that they would message to their people, and we would message to our people, and other people would message to still other people, right? Because those people were assembled and had certain values that bound them together. We didn't insist that we all had to agree on what the values were. We agreed on what the policy outcome was. And so we found ways to make temporary cause or coalition. And the interesting thing about this was during that era, from 2005 to 2008, we were able to work with left-wing coalitions extremely effectively because George W. Bush was in the White House. And some of those relationships lasted into the teens. There's still one, two lists I'm on that existed all the way back in the mid aughts of coalition people. Obviously, a lot of the people that are in it are different, and I'm not as deeply involved anymore. I still see the emails when they come through because they're chains, they're groups. And we still occasionally sign a letter or something like that. But during our heyday, we used this transpartisan approach. So transpartisan means most people think of politics as a linear line of left to right, and compromise is what's found by coming to the center. So the centrists are the problem solvers of the story. They're the heroes of the story. We disagree. Another word for this is bipartisan, which George Carlin accurately called a scam. It means that now both sides don't get screwed. So what we did instead was we went to the outsides of that, and we were as progressive as the progressives or liberals were. We were as conservative or traditionalist the traditionalists were. We went to the outsides, to the people out there who tend to be underrepresented, who tend to be compromised away, and we worked to bring those ideas together, kind of in an arc over top of that. And we felt like the libertarians could become the new centrists of this kind of model.
I want to bring us up to the last couple of years, and we've witnessed the Libertarian Party's messaging shift. There was a big distaste in the Libertarian Party messaging, and then a couple of years ago, the reset happened. The Mises Caucus effectively took over. What they did, majority, I guess, is how we would describe that. That shift at the time, even people like Nick Gillespie were like, well, we'll see what happens. And wasn't super negative per se. But now that we've seen some of that play out, where have you seen that trajectory of the party's messaging, and what can we learn from that as Christians? Does some of this work? Does some of it not? Where do you see the effectiveness there?
So it's interesting because I'm called upon by various people from various camps inside the party to this very hour. So I think that Michael Heiss, for example, who founded the Mises Caucus, is a very savvy, hardworking guy who believes very much in what it is that he's doing. He's one of the people I speak to. And I don't know of anybody that quite has his level of intensity or thinks quite as strategically as he does. That said, I think that the messaging is bad. I think that the messaging is just flat out not good. It has fallen for this culture war stuff. It believes that the place that where society is breaking down is culture, and it believes that the solutions lie with the state. And that cannot possibly be a libertarian message. So I want to say something here. You probably are already noticing I'm measuring my words very carefully.
It's fine.
The world's smallest political quiz features the Nolan chart. David Nolan came up with this diamond, and at the top is the libertarian quadrant of the diamond, right? It is possible for anyone basically who kind of scores in that range based on answering the questions there and various other tests like the political compass and whatnot, they could score kind of in the libertarian box. And to me, that is everybody that has kind of made it into the libertarian tent. It's not my job to rule whether or not somebody is or isn't libertarian. You can disagree with a libertarian position and still be a libertarian. But there are gold standard libertarian positions. And when you decide that you do not get to decide subjectively that my position is libertarian, that actually means something. The words mean something. Words necessarily must mean something, or we can't really accurately communicate. So you can't say, well, I'm going to take this position and I'm going to baptize it as libertarian, and suddenly it's libertarian. You just can't do that. And one area where this has happened very significantly is on immigration. There's a whole bunch of people who have a position on immigration that is not libertarian. They themselves are still libertarians. I want to emphasize, they are libertarians. But their position is explicitly not libertarian. There is a libertarian position on immigration. Again, because it's don't use force, right? As soon as you say, well, we can use force this way, we can initiate violence in the following way, and it'll be okay. And so, there's Maha. There's a right now, Robert Kennedy has become something of a libertarian hero or icon in that world. And there's talk of an expanding influence or role for the Kennedy wing, for a Kennedy wing of the Libertarian Party, which just saying those words is just so hard for me to get my head around, right? And
that's harder than the concept of President Donald Trump 20 years ago, right? Yeah.
He believes in using government force to make us more healthy. He believes in that. I don't. I believe that the entire thing has to be done by persuasion. Now, to the degree that the state has been contributing to this problem all the time, I'm 100% in agreement with them. Stop the state from influencing things with the food pyramid or, bad, safety labels or whatever. The endorsement of various poisons being put in our food. You can stop all of that regulatory capture. I'm for that all day long. But when you turn around and say, no, we're going to go from that to banning stuff, prohibiting stuff, regulating, controlling, increasing the number of inspections, fines, all the rest of the stuff that they do, that is not libertarian. And I feel like on a variety of issues, that's been kind of the general trend or bent, that we can cheat, we can get a little bit ahead. Because, the left cheated, so now we have to too. Like they did it first, so now we got to do it too. And if you're culturally conservative or culturally progressive, I don't care. What I care about is whether or not you're going to use force to achieve your social goals.
So I want to push back a little bit on that, because I'm not sure they would find the characterization of, well, they cheated, so we get to, or that they are wanting to use the state for libertarian ends. Partly, and the reason I think it's fair to say that they would probably object to that is that most of them are actual anarchists in the libertarian anarcho-libertarian world, right? They're not minimal state and saying, well, these are the little things that we want. They're actual anarchists, right? And so they would want the state out of those things. At least the ones that I know. I'm pretty sure Michael Heiss is the same. If I'm almost certain about that. So are you thinking of, hey, they want to use the state to restrict immigration? Is that the quintessential example? Because that's like my biggest personal objection to that wing.
It's not just immigration, Doug.
Yeah,
it's not just immigration. There are several things, and I just gave another really broad, big area, which is the mental health area.
Okay,
yes. There's certain language they want to prohibit and ban. They want to make decisions for local schools. I don't think that's any of their purview. I don't think that stuff is their purview.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that. Do you still think it's fair to characterize it as they want to use the state because of left cheating?
It's not just them. Let me be very clear.
Okay.
The first salvos in this internal, because we're focused now a little bit more on the party wing of the libertarian movement.
Yep.
The initial salvos were not thrown by them. It was done by the other side. There's a specific character who did it, and basically unified them, that they had to do something. They were basically being told they weren't welcome in this party. And so I believe that conflict tends to radicalize people and make them more ugly. I have a very Girardian view of the world that says that they're going to continue to escalate, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse and worse until they find something or someone to scapegoat. And that's been the pattern that's happened here, is that whatever, the own the lib stuff that's going on in the Mises caucus is a reaction to what was initiated against them and how they were told the party had to be and how unwelcome they were.
Yeah, I think I've sort of said before that, like, the Mises caucus are libertarians except when they're MAGA, and then like the classical liberal caucus are libertarians except when they're Democrats. Like there's
it's worse than that. It's worse than that. They completely flubbed the pandemic. Not just a little bit.
Who's they? The party?
Yes, the leadership, the then leadership of the party, when this all went down.
This was pre-Mises caucus, right? Because that was what,
completely blew that.
Clarifying that for everybody listening.
It was the greatest cataclysm of our time. When 9/11 happened, one of the reasons Harry Browne is admired, and the Mises caucus, God bless them, are the people who remember this the best. On 9/12, I happen to be the president of a brand new organization. There's a whole story behind that that's very dramatic, especially for me personally and my family. And it was my second full day on the job. And it had a devastating impact on us because the next day, to make matters worse, Harry Browne wrote a column called "When Will We Learn?" and then proceeded to write a series of columns because that got such reaction. And I am the source. Every time you hear this story being told, you are looking at the source right now for this story. It was the most published. We included this in Harry's, in his biography at his passing. It was his most published article ever. And that's saying something. He'd been a Los Angeles Times columnist in the 60s. He'd been published by WorldNet Daily and a host of other sources. He'd been on television. He'd been on Firing Line. He'd been on all this stuff. He already was a public figure, a New York Times bestselling author. This was his best published article in the political phase of his career. And he wasn't running for president anymore. He'd already put the two campaigns behind him. We got a very negative reaction to that column. He did the right thing on the day. When this rolls back around, and now something even bigger and badder is happening in slow motion. So you have time to think and talk. It's not the day after. This is going on for years. They did not speak up. And the Mises caucus is right to be critical of it. They did not speak up at the time. And some of them even endorsed what was happening. So, one person in particular liked to go around saying science is your friend, meaning that somehow or other science was supposed to trump what you believed as a libertarian. So I'm just going to, where rubber meets the road here.
Yeah.
In April of 2020, I was called by the Associated Press and did an interview. And they were basically doing, there's no libertarians in a pandemic. That was the theme. And that was what the author of the piece wanted to convey. Well, there's one person who didn't play along in that column. There's a handful of libertarians quoted, including a former national director at the time. There's one guy that doesn't play along with that. You're looking at him. Because everybody started to scatter and get scared. They were afraid of what they were going to say. Why? You want people to die. They didn't want to be accused of that at the time. Well, I didn't want people to die either. That's just a stupid. But there were arguments that could be made at the time, and I did it that day with the reporter on the phone. And that was the actual interview took place like March 30th or so. 2 weeks into the lockdown phase.
Well, and I would be remiss if I didn't put a plug in for our upcoming book, A House Divided. What did the church do wrong over COVID, and how can we heal in the aftermath? But back to the interview. Yeah, so I mean, you talked about the way that this kind of conflict can be ultimately very destructive. And I mean, I think you could kind of make an argument that, you know, sometimes conflict can be an iron sharpens iron type thing, or you can even go back and say, let's say we've got sort of heretics in the party, like the Arians, right? I mean, the Arians in the 4th century helped us to kind of refine our doctrine and our dogma about the incarnation of Christ and the identity of Christ. So, you know, even though they're kind of the bad guys of the story, they played an important part that ended up being sort of really productive in the long run. So, but even just maybe let's say that we're not talking about heretics of the party. Let's just say we're talking about disagreement, that you have these sort of factions, and, you know, maybe you can make an argument that sometimes that can help, right? You know, like there's different parts of the body of Christ, and, you know, they're all important, even the a-holes. So, like, is that kind of could you make an argument for?
I thought I cut that out of our outline, Cody.
No, it's I wrote it and you left it, so I said it.
All right,
sorry. So I mean,
it's a technical term.
Yeah. Do you feel anuses? I don't know. Do you feel like
they have their own caucus, I guess, right?
Anus caucus. Yes, it rhymes kind of. Okay, so I mean, do you feel like there is an argument for the fact that, you know, we do have these sort of factions, and maybe we could debate about, you know, you're not really libertarian in this area, or maybe, you know, but like, can there be good that comes out of that?
So early in this discussion, you asked me about kind of the difference between Harry Brown's era and now, and the level of conflict that was in it. The things that we were arguing about back then were how to get things done and who should do them. They were not about what should be done. We all agreed on that stuff. If you go back and watch Harry Brown's 1996 acceptance speech, which is available on C-SPAN video, and you can find it on YouTube, one of the things that you find is that it's just red meat on top of red meat on top of red meat to a libertarian audience that completely gets what he's saying. And none of it was perceived as being more right or more left at the time. None of it. It's just not how it was. Nobody thought that way. Like, we weren't looking to try to bolster one side or the other. We weren't looking to get acceptance from one side or the other. The criticism I would have on the left-hand side is that they definitely want a pat on the head from the cosmopolitan class. And you know, I don't care for, like, you should want their arrows where they're unwilling, especially when they're unwilling to live by their own principles for partisan cause. You know, Bill Clinton gets into the White House and we find out that he's engaged in some really gross sexual behaviors. And feminists come out and say, well, you know, ladies, you should shut up and take one for the team. There was a bimbo squad that was designed to take those people out, and Hillary was involved in the operation of that. They were a very anti-woman, and that was okay. And Doug has already brought up the hypocrisy on war. Like, they're very anti-war during the Bush-Cheney years, but, you know, they suddenly swallowed whatever principles they had during the Obama years, which were literally a continuation. Like, it's the same term. On a foreign policy basis, the countries around the world that are interacting with this administration, they see very little difference. They might see a little tactical difference, but they see no strategic difference between the Obama administration and the Bush administration. They're identical. And yet they had nothing to say at that point because it was all about partisan nonsense. And we shouldn't be caught up in the partisan nonsense, because that's not what our unique selling proposition is. It's not the thing that makes us special, unique, and necessary. If you're not special, if you're not unique, you're not necessary. And if you can't figure out how to convey that to people on a consistent through line, especially with the limited budget we have, you're not going to get anywhere.
No, I think the appeal of libertarianism and Christianity to me is that it's kind of rooted in these sort of objective values, right? That you sort of say, you may not like it, but this is what's right. And so you can sort of be principled and you don't have to compromise. So to me, the idea that you would become a libertarian and then compromise doesn't make a lot of sense. Just be a Republican or a Democrat. So I mean, we've picked on the kind of the left wing side of libertarianism as well.
Can I jump backwards for 1 second?
Yeah.
Because there actually is one more thing to say. You chose to leave a word in, Cody, that we chuckled about a couple of moments ago. But there is room for a-holes. I think people who defied various parts of the C-19 regime were performing a function that by definition made them a-holes. they had to stick out. They had to be willing to take heat. They had to be willing to be different. They had to be willing to even take some persecution in some cases. They might have even been threatened with violence, and they still did it anyway. And that didn't happen in Australia, to pick a place. They didn't have that same response. There weren't enough a-holes, frankly. So thank God for them. The American Revolution was made up of people who were being pretty unreasonable. But being unreasonable sometimes is what you need to do to get your liberty. So where it shows up, I think it's you could tell who's doing the right thing by looking at where the arrows are coming. If the firing squad is circular and we're shooting each other, that's wrong. But if we're getting attacked from the outside, that's a sign that we're over the target and doing the right thing.
Well, arguably one of the biggest a-holes in politics right now is Donald Trump. And the Mises Caucus strategy has kind of been kind of hitch maybe the libertarian cause to that Trump bandwagon a little bit. I mean, what did you think of that strategy kind of at the time last year leading up to the election? And do you think it's paid off? Do you think that, Trump has been kind of libertarian-ish? What do you think about Doge? Do you think that Mises strategy, Angela McArdle is sort of saying she's, pointed out to places where she feels like she's been vindicated and she thinks she'll continue to be vindicated. What's your sense so far?
Here at the Libertarian Christian Institute, you are representing libertarianism as a social philosophy that says essentially that violence and theft and coercion are not the way to get things done. It was, in my mind, a mistake by David Nolan and his compadres in his living room to name this party the Libertarian Party. I know why they did it, but it was still a mistake because it's the name of our philosophy. And so consequently, what ends up happening is this philosophy name gets tied into a partisan cause, and partisanship is fashion fleeting, right? So one of the things that is consistent about my libertarianism and my faith is that I am not an iconoclast. I don't believe there's any human being that I look at as like some hero that I can't question or that I have to totally identify with. And the whole thing sinks or swims based on this person. And that is very much the position. And I think this is a marketing mistake too. It's very much the position that the current LP has put itself in, where they are tied to the personality of one man who then is so big, so large. He's bigger than any phenomena I can recall in my political life. He sucks the air out of the room. You want to increase the number of people who watch the show, put his name, not mine, on the episode. Just put it there randomly, clickbait it. Because everybody's looking for stuff about him every day. It amazes me that nobody's ever exhausted of this. It just keeps going and going and going. And the fact that somehow that we're going to be able to steer his brand, and he's going to be more like us, and then if we agree to be more him, I think is a categorical mistake. It's idolatry. It's the belief that we'll put this guy up on a pedestal, and then he gets to represent us. And even if you didn't intend for that to happen, that will be the long-term effect. He's making some huge categorical mistakes, things that frankly are not libertarian, by the way, that I'm not going to want to see this philosophy that I embrace take the hit for.
So I have actually wanted to ask you this for a few weeks now that we're a couple months into the Trump administration. What kind of scorecard would you give on certain things? You said you're largely critical, but you said there's been a whole 4 years worth in 2 months. What have you seen that you would evaluate as maybe marginally good, maybe really good? Include Doge in that, because that's probably the thing that libertarians would, in principle, want to be more excited about. Despite the fact that we don't want to call the government efficient, we just want to cut it. So ignore that piece of it. But a lot of libertarians have a lot of energy behind the concept of Doge and having somebody like Elon Musk who knows how to cut a business, cut the government. But anyway, what's the report card so far in your mind?
Well, nothing's perfect, but I'm a fan of Doge. So, like, if you say you got to pick a side, are you for or against Doge? I'm for, and very much so. I wish Vivek had stayed involved. I think he would have made a more consistent philosophical case, and his emphasis was going to be on regulation, which I think is a huge, huge issue that really hits us where we live, even more than some of this little bit of spending that they're snipping off right now. The USAID thing is so big. People do not understand what a big, hairy deal this was. Very few people get that USAID has been a CIA front all along. It's been what's called soft force. It's the idea that we are able to do things to kind of manipulate other countries to do something short of war, to do what we want them to do. You're going to comply with what we're doing one way or the other. We're willing to go all the way up to using war, but maybe we can convince you with some bribes to your leaders. Maybe we can put programs in place to change the programming in your culture. Maybe we can even overthrow a government. And that's what USAID has been involved in consistently the whole time. And most Americans are just now learning this story and not even fully getting it. It is a huge deal that they're doing this.
Is there a place that, just on that point, because I think it's really tough, because when I get on social media, my leftist friends are talking about all of the, the people who lost funding, and these are, they're people actually going without in a way that would actually break our hearts. But then there's also the people on the right who are saying very much things like what you're saying. Is there a source that you can point to, or maybe send us for the show notes, that kind of spells some of this out? Because outside the outrageous headlines, I don't sometimes know what to believe.
No, I don't happen to have one handy. My interest in this comes from the fact that I've been studying at length and even have traveled to do this. A historical event that happened in the 1960s. And USAID, the CIA, you learn as you start to get into the story and you go down the various rabbit holes that exist in it, you start to learn how the intelligence structure works. And the intelligence structure was up to really extreme no good up until the Church Commission. They've had to regroup in the decades since. But since 9/11, they've been back up to an extreme amount of no good. They never stopped. I just want to be clear. But they're back up to an extreme level of no good. And so the problem is that one side, the Doge side has focused most on scores. Like, we've saved the taxpayer X amount of money because that's the easiest story to tell. We have this entity in San Antonio that is only open a couple of days a year, and they're getting $2 billion in funding or whatever it is, and so we'll focus on that, right? And we'll focus on things like that, and that's cool. I'm happy about all that stuff, but it's not. In the grand scheme of things, we're still, even if you're talking, 200 million or 2 billion or even a million, whatever, it's not a huge amount of money in the grand scope. It's not going to get our budget balanced. It's not even going to really reduce our deficit in any kind of measurable sense, percentage-wise. It won't even register. But the left only focuses on those handful of programs where some aid actually was done. The New York Times did it here this week. They've already said that, there are people who have died as a result of programs that are in Africa. And those programs do exist. You can't spend all of this money and not accomplish some, it's saying you're going to do some social goods and not accomplish some social goods some places. There's a whole question as to whether or not the government should or shouldn't, and how those programs should have been wound down. I question how they were wound down in those particular cases. I think it should have been a little more methodical than what they did.
Yeah.
But that is such a small part of what USAID is doing. And it's not just USAID. There is a whole NGO nonprofit grift running through the entire process. And if people started to process the state as a giant grift, they would much better understand how all of it's working and why it's set up the way it is. And there are people responding negatively to doing anything to cut it, because that means it exposes the payoffs and the cracks. People are going to lose checks. They had income coming in, and that income's going to go away. It may have been illegitimate. So what? Why couldn't you just leave it alone? Because the government's so big. That is the part of the story that I don't feel is being completely told. Like, what did that stuff do? So let me give you one example. How do you get people to a protest? So I get called and invited to go speak to Tea Party events in 2010 and 11. Tea Party's inviting me to speak all over the place. And I go and speak at these events, and I challenge them at these events. I don't just tell them everything they want to hear. I tell them what they need to hear as well. But they love me. They keep inviting me back, and they refer me to their friends, and I'm going and speaking at these Tea Party events. But I turn on the television, and Nancy Pelosi goes, "This is all AstroTurf. This is all AstroTurf." Well, I don't know if you've ever heard the phrase, "It takes one to know one," or "methinks she doth protest too much." That's how the left has always got their big crowds at these things. They're AstroTurf. They're paid for. There's a significant chunk of the people that are in the room that are paid for. So they have a hard time believing that people would voluntarily get off their couch, go and participate in an event like this. They just can't believe people would do it on their own. They have to have some kind of bribe in place to get it done because that's how they organized. And I will tell you that socially, the left is constructed much different. They get along with each other very, very well. They've learned how to play nice with each other in ways that libertarians haven't, just to pick a group. They've learned how to mix with other people. And so they'll say, Doug, your cause might be the environment. Cody's might be abortion. That's your number one cause. But our number two cause, and it was after Donald Trump got elected the first time, was our voting laws and our election laws. And so your second biggest priority is going to be the election laws now. And we're all going to have meetings together and we're going to get our people together and we're going to do something. And they do it. They actually get it done. And they use a lot of this money that's being floated around through the state. And if you cut off this funding, you will significantly diminish the amount of left-wing activism that we see. It will go down.
Well, so, that's kind of I think you're highlighting some of the really, I think, strong things about that Doge could possibly do. I mean, I think Doge is really messy for me because I want to see significant cuts, but I want to see them happen thoughtfully and intentionally. I also want them to be big cuts, just kind of playing around with some of the little things that aren't really significantly adding to the budget. But I also don't want to give the president greater power in the process. And, I know that a lot of this stuff is going to be challenged in courts about whether or not the president actually can do some of the things that he's trying to do here.
So here's the problem with that. And this is where they're failing. The Republicans don't mean any of it.
Right.
Okay.
Well, except for Rand Paul and Thomas Massie.
Yeah. And look what's happened to Thomas Massie here lately.
Oh my gosh.
So
you mean the massive fundraise that happened because Trump called him out?
Yeah. They don't mean it. This is at the end of the day that, they can't even pass. Rand Paul made a very small ask. He does this a lot. He'll say, okay, I recognize you're not going to agree with me on this, but can we at least stop giving foreign aid to the three countries that hate us the most, right? So, the version that he does here is, can we at least just agree that the amount that Doge has already zeroed out, they've already taken out, can we just take those things out of the budget? Can we remove those? No, we got to spend that money too. So it turns out the Republican Party doesn't mean it. And then there are several bad things they're doing. The immigration deportation approach that they're following, wrong. The need to build the wall, have more police on our streets or ICE on our streets, wrong. Very dangerous. Very, very dangerous to what's the militarization of this entire process. The federal policing and militarization. I do not want that power in the hands of a future administration because it will be used in bad ways. Every one of these administrations expands its power, and then the next one uses it in a way that everybody's like, I didn't see this coming. And so I'm concerned about that. The tariffs are very, very destructive. I understand what the president thinks he's trying to achieve here. I can steel man his argument. It's still a horrible one. It doesn't even get past go, let alone collect $200.
Do you feel like what's the prospect of something like USAID actually getting spun back up again in 3-4 years?
It's going to be spun up inside the State Department now. It's going to morph and take a different form. And over time, we will forget that this happened, and the people involved in that kind of stuff will manage to get it reinflated. That's my prediction. It needs to be killed dead.
I've been thinking a little bit about the potential challenge that I think Doge is uncovering something a little bit, which is that, at least I think it will over time as a lot of the stuff gets challenged in court, is that you actually can't get much to happen and get it to stick without really getting everybody involved in the process to sign off on it. And that means you can't make drastic bad changes very easily, but you also can't make drastic good changes very easily. And it makes me wonder, as a libertarian, do we really have a path forward with things being that way? Because ultimately, if we don't get significant buy-in from politicians, the United States doesn't really it may inch toward libertarianism, but it's not going to do any great leaps toward libertarianism, right? I mean, does Doge, do you think, is going to sort of demonstrate that reality that we can't really do this kind of stuff?
I can steel man them on this too. A lot of politics is optics, and they're getting optics right now. They're managing to show or demonstrate to people how things work. It would have been a lot harder to have a sit-down, rational discussion and gain the emotional purchase of the American people that something's happening, something's getting done, and gee, look what's happening, what crimes are happening behind the curtain, if we had a discussion about whether or not we should or shouldn't open the curtain in the first place. And so I'm not sure that an orderly process is necessarily the best way to get there. It might be that this messiness had to be part of the equation. I don't know that. I don't want to stake my reputation on that, but I'm starting to wonder whether it would have been possible to do it otherwise. In military thinking, there's something called the OODA loop, OODA, which means observe, orient, decide, act. It's a decision cycle. And it's defined as a loop because in any kind of competition, even if you're just sparring with another man, there is a speed at which the trained person sees things and the untrained person sees things. And in that combat situation, you're trying to get inside the other person's circle and make your decisions faster and faster and faster. And conversely, you're trying to create enough confusion in them that their circle gets bigger and bigger and their decision cycles slower and slower and slower. And that is exactly what you see happening right now, is that they have managed to slow tremendously and widen the Democrats' decision cycle. They don't know what to do in some cases. They've been on their heels. They are blitzing forward, attempting to create rapid action, do things very quickly, and create confusion on the other side while they do it, so that they can begin to get some of the stuff exposed and out on the surface. Maybe the exposure of these items will lead to policy reforms we need to make later. Maybe they will lead to the creation of political movements we need later. And maybe this messiness was a necessary first step.
Yeah. I think it was J.D. Vance who was in an interview like 2 weeks after they were sworn in. So basically, maybe not using that analogy but basically saying, we're going to go at this pace for 4 years. This is how we're going to get things done. Like he kind of can, in a way, even J.D. Vance himself is confirming what you're saying here about their approach. Okay, so I'm glad people are listening to this podcast, because if they wouldn't have heard anything I just said if they were watching. So, all right, Jim, we're gonna wrap up and ask you a very broad question. What would you say is the best way to be a libertarian during the Trump administration? What do you see? How can we best listen? Think of our audience. We're libertarians. We're Christians. And we've got almost 4 years left of a Trump administration, and we need to be the best libertarian Christians we can be. What advice do you have for us?
I have a show called Grace Archie with Jim Babka. And we have an episode of Instant Grace, which are mini episodes that we do that we just did recently. One was called Calling Balls and Strikes in the Trump era. Like we believe that when he does something right, say so. When he does something wrong, say so. And always be that person. Make clear that you are consistently not part of the captive audience. You are committed to a principle. But do so with grace. Do so with love. And recognize that this is a transitory period. He's a human being, a flawed one at that. And we shouldn't put our stock or faith in him or his party or his administration. If he's doing the right thing, you should support. If he's doing the wrong thing, you should say so. And you should listen and act in kindness towards people on all sides of this issue. Attempt to understand where they're coming from, really hear them out. And then you'll gain the necessary ability to speak back to them in love why it is that you believe what you believe. But agree that you're going to walk away still loving your neighbor, or even, I don't know, this might seem novel, your enemy.
Well, Jim, I think it's a great place to end on this episode. I appreciate you joining us for this special 400th episode of the Libertarian Christian Podcast, and appreciate all that you have to offer with Grace Archie, with what you're doing in downsizing DC, and for also being a good sport about Cody's misbehavior in this episode.
Oh, this was the best part, and it's been an honor. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Jim. We really appreciate you being here for the 400th episode of the Libertarian Christian Podcast.